remember when it was a really big deal when the first rounder signed the contract? Remember that? Is he going to hold out? Is he going to be there at the beginning of camp? How much will it hurt him to miss a day of camp or 2 days of camp? Remember that? Doesn't happen anymore. Not since the rookies had their wages capped. Good morning to you. Good Tuesday morning. I'm Dejan Kovacevic of DK Pittsburgh Sports, and this is Daily Shot of Steelers. It comes your way bright and early every weekday if you're into hockey and or baseball. I also offer daily shots of Penguins and Pirates in the same place that you found this. And yes, Troy Fautanu signed his rookie contract yesterday. There was a picture of him doing so on the Steelers social media. And later on, there were pictures of him and other rookies and other new players having a good time at Kennywood. And remember I told you, you never know what the Steelers are going to do on day 7 of OTAs? It's always something like that. They just went to Kennywood. And by all accounts, according to all the visuals, looked like they had a really nice time. Fautanu himself is having a nice time, finally, in this fold. I'm going to share a little story with you. When the very first day of OTAs a couple weeks ago had been complete, and most of the players had headed into the locker room, some stayed on the field, some went to work out, some here or there, but most of them came into the room, I did my usual thing and went toward the offensive lineman. And it's over there that I engaged in a pretty spirited conversation with Broderick Jones, with Dan Moore, and I noticed over Jones's shoulder that James Daniels was having some fun too. Isaac Seumalo eventually walked by, a smile on his face. It's just the O-line guys were feeling it a little bit. I don't know why. They just were. Might be because they're all better at run blocking than they are at pass blocking, you know? I don't know if it has to be more complicated than that. One guy sat at his stall with his head halfway into that stall, not talking to anybody, not acknowledging anything that was happening around him. And I thought to myself, all right, I mean, it's, you know, he's brand new. He knows his place. He's a rookie, has yet to participate in a single snap in anger in the NFL. I thought that's actually kind of cool. Unless I'm mistaken, I might have even mentioned it to you on this show, like in a praiseworthy kind of way. So a couple more of those sessions go by. In the following week, Fautanu confesses to a bank of cameras and microphones that he didn't feel he had performed well enough. First week of OTAs. OTAs. They're not even really doing anything. It's football in shorts. They're basically trailing X's and O's in the grass. Well, this extraordinary young man quite clearly felt that he hadn't done a very extraordinary job of having his X in the right place. And he made no secret, either to his teammates or to any of us, and obviously in turn not to any of his coaches, that he felt he didn't do well enough and that he was bound and determined to have a stronger second week. And did he? Well, all I can tell you is that by the middle of the OTA sessions from last week, all of a sudden, what do you know? He was laughing. He was having some fun. He wasn't being obnoxious, wasn't being, wow, I don't have a nicer way to say this. He wasn't being Zach Banner. Okay? And believe you me, I'd say that if Banner was standing right here. Because that's to this day the loudest offensive lineman I've ever witnessed. But he was having some fun, you know, not out in the grass, not when practice was going on, not when there was work to be done, but in the locker room with the rest of the guys. And that sent a signal to me, whether it's accurate or not, that he did feel better about himself. He did feel better about the way things had gone.
That's what I'm hearing a lot from the guys, is find something to get better at, and I emphasized that today and felt like I did. So I'm learning a lot from these guys, you know, especially Dan, Broderick, just everybody in the room, Isaac as well. They're all kind of, you know, taking me under their wing and helping me out. So
I love to see little stuff like this at this time of year. Everyone always wants to know at OTAs who made the big catch, who looks good, how do the quarterbacks have their timing down with the wide receivers or whatever. And that stuff just doesn't really matter. This does. You want to see this kid live up to all of his reputation, including the off-the-field reputation. He expects of himself excellence. And as such, he's going to expect of himself to compete for the starting job. I don't know if he's going to get it right away. My indications actually are pretty strong that Moore is doing a lot to impress Arthur Smith in the early going. But I don't want my first-round pick thinking, yeah, oh well, what can I do? The veterans are here. They have their own pedigree and whatever else, and maybe the coordinator likes the older guys or whatever. I don't want him thinking that. I want him being upset if he feels he didn't do well. And I want him to feel really good about himself when he does. That stuff does show itself at OTAs and mini camps, and of course, once you get to Latrobe. And just remember this episode when we get to Latrobe and you find out that he's doing what everybody hopes that he'll do. Because it just might have started right then and there. When we come back, J1Q. This segment of Daily Shot is brought to you by our good friends at Mike's Beer Bar. They're located on Federal Street, directly across from PNC Park. Mike has more than 500 beers on tap, including from more than 50 local breweries. Stop in and say hello. Tell Mike we sent you. Mike's Beer Bar. Today's J1Q comes from Chris, and he wasn't the only one to ask this one. DK, does the Justin Jefferson deal with the Vikings, 4 years, $140 million. $110 million of that guaranteed, $88.7 million of that due at signing. Does that open the eyes of the folks who thought that the Steelers should go all in on a wide receiver? That's a ridiculous amount of money, in my opinion, and can cause a lot of fluctuations with the roster moving forward. You know, Chris, I have stuff to say about this, not least of which is that my own belief, and if I were a Minnesota fan, I'd be ecstatic today, is that Jefferson's worth that. He has that kind of an impact on the game. I believe he'd have more of an impact on the game if he wasn't playing there, meaning if he was playing for a better team, better offense, better quarterback. But he himself is that good. So none of this is to begrudge either Jefferson or anybody in the National Football League getting paid what they're worth. Heaven knows their careers are short enough. They need to make it when it's there to be made. But here's what I'm going to do today. Instead of answering this myself, I'm going to throw back a question to all of you. And I hope you find a way to answer. That can be in the comments section at DK Pittsburgh Sports, which is the first place I always look. It can be under the YouTube video. You go ahead and figure that out. I'm pretty easy to reach. But here's the question. If running backs have become so devalued, and they have, that they're basically being discarded at the first sign of anything at all that's amiss, if you see that they're sitting there forever and ever and ever in free agency, if you're watching an NFL draft wondering why some of the biggest names and biggest stars in college football don't get taken, and then from there, the rationale, and I hear this constantly, is that, running backs they're everywhere. You can always get a running back. You can just hang around. Wait after the draft and get a running back and get Jalen Warren there. You don't need to draft a running back, and you don't need to pay them. Okay, so let's say that we accept that as fact, meaning reasonable fact as opposed to just being true. It's obviously true. Then can someone explain to me why we now enter every draft with the biggest, best class of wide receivers we've ever seen? And I actually meant for that to sound like it was my monster truck voice with all kinds of echoes and stuff. But that's all you hear is there's going to be 17 impact wide receivers in the first 2 rounds. Wow! The previous year it was 15. Before that it was 12, and we thought that was wow. And it never stops. That particular trait has become perennial. From what I understand, it's going to be a long, long time until the NFL draft sees a year where they just go, man, there's just no wide receivers anywhere, or there's just very few, and they're precious, and you better scoop them up when you see them, kind of like the approach was in this most recent draft with offensive tackles. Not with wide receivers, they're everywhere. Okay, well, if they're everywhere, why have they not lost value? Or are they about to lose value? In other words, is it possible that maybe Omar Khan's a little bit ahead of the curve by saying, listen, I have no use for paying Deontay Johnson $18 million. I just don't. I believe I can get a wide receiver for a lot less than that. I know for a fact I can add a wide receiver in the draft because there's going to be one available even in the 3rd and 4th rounds who could walk right under my huddle. And lo and behold, the draft comes around. Omar gets Troy Fautanu first. He gets Zach Frazier second. 3rd round comes along, and hey, guess what? Roman Wilson is still here, and Mike Tomlin loves Roman Wilson. So they get this receiver. He's making, roughly $17 million less than what Deontay will make in Charlotte, and quite possibly it's the beginning of the end of this type of valuation for wide receivers, and the Vikings just didn't get the memo. Following me on this? Let me know what you think. I appreciate the question. I appreciate everybody listening to Daily Shot of Steelers. We're going to do another one of these tomorrow, including your input on this Jefferson issue.